Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly chilling journey deep into the heart of ancient Greece. Not to the democratic halls of Athens or the philosophical debates of Plato, but straight to the sacred slopes of Mount Parnassus, home of the legendary Oracle of Delphi. You're about to discover what sucked about being the Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece. A life that, despite its immense spiritual power and reverence, was a relentless existence defined by divine intrusion, profound personal sacrifice, and a terrifying loss of autonomy. Forget personal choice and a quiet life for the Pythia. Her destiny was chosen by Apollo himself, and it was a burden she could not refuse. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the initial calling without longing for a simple, anonymous life as a shepherdess. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing on the sacred grounds of Delphi, around the 6th or 5th century BCE, a time when the oracle's influence was at its absolute zenith. The air here feels different, charged with a palpable sense of the divine, a mix of the crisp mountain breeze and the faint, earthy scent of ancient rituals. You are not a petitioner seeking divine guidance. You are one of the chosen, a woman whose life is about to be utterly consumed by the will of the god Apollo. Your journey begins not with a personal decision, but with a fateful calling, a divine selection that strips you of any choice in your own destiny. The Pythia, as the oracle was known, was always a woman, typically older, perhaps a peasant or a humble local. This wasn't a position of inherent nobility or wealth. Instead, the selection was believed to be entirely divine, a direct choice by Apollo. There was no application process, no public election. The priests of Apollo, based on signs or omens, would identify a woman deemed suitable, often one known for her piety, wisdom, or simply a certain unassuming purity. Imagine living your quiet life, perhaps tending sheep or weaving cloth, when suddenly the priests arrive, declaring that a god has chosen you to be his mouthpiece. Your world, in that instant, would be irrevocably shattered. It truly sucked to be picked by a god for a job you didn't apply for. This divine selection meant an absolute loss of personal autonomy. Your life, from that moment on, ceased to be your own. You could not refuse the calling. To do so would be to defy Apollo himself, an act of sacrilege that could bring divine wrath upon you and your community, your past life, your family, any personal relationships or dreams you might have harbored. All were immediately relinquished. You would be taken into the sanctuary of Apollo, a consecrated space, to live a life entirely dedicated to the god and his prophecies. The reasons for Apollo's supposed choice were deeply intertwined with ancient Greek religious beliefs. Delphi was considered the omphalos navel of the world, its most sacred site. Where the Earth Mother's ancient oracle was taken over by Apollo, the Pythia was the conduit, the vessel through whom the god himself would speak. Her purity, her detachment from worldly affairs, and her complete submission were seen as essential for her to be an unblemished channel for divine wisdom. Your individuality was systematically stripped away to make you a more perfect instrument for the god. This selection was for life, once chosen as the Pythia. You served until your death, or until you became too infirm to perform your duties. There was no retirement, no leaving the sacred precinct. Your existence was perpetually bound to the temple of Apollo, a living embodiment of the god's presence on earth. This profound, lifelong commitment imposed without your consent, ensured that your entire adult existence would be defined by this single, overwhelming duty. One common misconception is that the Pythia was always a young, beautiful virgin. While early traditions might have emphasized youth and purity, historical sources suggest that in later periods, the Pythia was often an older woman, perhaps over 50. This shift may have been due to concerns about the safety of young women in a highly public role, or simply a pragmatic recognition that older women possessed more life experience and gravitas suitable for such a revered position. However, she was always expected to maintain a life of chastity and ritual purity within the sanctuary. Regardless of her age, this transformation from a perhaps ordinary older woman to a divine vessel highlights the profound nature of the calling. Historians still meticulously study the various textual accounts and archaeological evidence from Delphi to understand the precise age and social backgrounds of the Pythias across different historical periods, often finding a more diverse profile than popular myth suggests. Furthermore, the very secrecy and mystery surrounding the Pythia's selection added to its horrifying nature. The process was not transparent. It was a decision made by priests behind closed doors, based on criteria known only to them and supposedly to Apollo. This lack of transparency meant that the chosen woman had no opportunity to understand the full implications of her calling until it was too late. Her fate was decided for her in the shadows, by forces she could neither comprehend nor resist. The prestige of being the oracle was immense, attracting petitioners from all over the Greek world and beyond. Kings, generals, city-states, and common individuals seeking guidance on everything from war and colonization to marriage and personal affairs. Your words, once spoken in a humble village, would now shape the destiny of nations. But this immense power was not yours. It was Apollo's. Merely channeled through you, the Pythia, you were a tool of immense influence, but ultimately a tool. So your life as the Oracle of Delphi began not with a personal choice, but with a terrifying, fateful calling that stripped you of your autonomy and propelled you into a destiny utterly beyond your control. This divine selection, forced upon you, ensured that your entire existence, from that moment forward, would be one of perpetual service, profound personal sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to a role that defined your very being, making it inherently sucky. Having been abruptly chosen by divine decree, your life as the Pythia immediately transformed into a rigid existence of purity, austerity, and profound isolation. Forget your former life, your personal desires, or the simple comforts of human connection. Your sacred role demanded a life of meticulous ritual and utter detachment, making your daily existence undeniably sucky. Imagine your new dwelling within the sacred precinct of Delphi, the sanctuary of Apollo. It wouldn't be a luxurious palace, rather, it would be a simple, consecrated dwelling, designed for quiet contemplation and ritual preparation. Your life here was one of asceticism, a deliberate shedding of worldly pleasures and temptations. You would forgo rich foods, elaborate clothing, and personal adornments. Your meals would be simple, likely vegetarian, consisting of barley cakes, fruits, and water from the sacred Castalian spring. Your clothing would be plain, unadorned robes, emphasizing your role as a vessel for the divine rather than an individual of personal status. It truly sucked to have your diet dictated by divine decree. Your hair, too, would be managed to reflect your purity, while the exact details varied over time. The emphasis was on simplicity and ritual cleanliness, often involving the covering of your head or the maintenance of a simple style. This was a deliberate contrast to the elaborate hairstyles and adornments of other Greek women, emphasizing your separation from the secular world. The most profound aspect of your new life was isolation. You were forbidden from having a husband, children, or any personal romantic relationships. Your body, once a vessel for human procreation, was now solely dedicated to channeling the divine word. While you might have a few female attendants, hosioi, and male priests, prophetai, who served in the temple, your interactions would be largely ritualistic and professional, not personal friendships. You would be largely cut off from the vibrant social life of ancient Greece, from public festivals, theatrical performances, and the lively debates of the agora. Your world was confined to the sacred precinct, a life of perpetual solitude within a holy space. It really sucked to be a hermit in the holiest place on earth. This enforced isolation served a crucial purpose to maintain your ritual purity. The ancient Greeks believed that a conduit for a god's words must be untainted by worldly desires, personal attachments, or moral impurities. Your detachment was seen as essential for Apollo to speak clearly and without interference through you. Every aspect of your austere life was designed to create this spiritual cleanliness, turning your existence into a continuous, living ritual. The demands on your time were relentless. Your days would be filled with preparation for prophecies, prayers, rituals, and offerings to Apollo. You would likely spend hours in meditation, purification rites, and contemplating the sacred. Even when not delivering prophecies, your existence was one of constant spiritual readiness, ensuring you were always a receptive vessel for the God's voice. This dedication left little to no time for personal leisure, hobbies, or the pursuit of individual interests outside your sacred duties. One common misconception is that the Pythia was entirely secluded and never saw anyone, while her direct interactions were limited and highly ritualized, particularly when entering her trance. She would still be involved in the daily life of the sanctuary. She would interact with priests, temple staff, and perhaps even some petitioners in a formal setting before the oracular sessions. However, these interactions were strictly controlled, serving her role, not her personal desire for companionship. Historians still meticulously study the daily routines and social interactions of the Pythia and other Delphic staff, often relying on temple inscriptions, ancient travelogues, and later literary accounts to piece together the practical realities of their secluded lives. Furthermore, the very silence of your isolated life, broken only by the whispers of priests and the occasional murmurs of petitioners, would amplify the psychological pressure of your role. You were the sole human conduit for Apollo. The weight of expectations from rulers, generals, and desperate individuals, all hanging on your words, would be immense. This immense responsibility, combined with profound isolation and lack of personal emotional support, would be a constant psychological burden. Even when the god was silent, your body was no longer truly your own. It was the god's. It had to be kept ritually pure, free from any perceived blemish or distraction. This meant rigid control over your diet, your sleep, and your very movements. You were constantly aware that your physical form was merely a temporary vessel, existing solely to serve a divine purpose, and any personal discomfort or desire was secondary to this sacred duty. This dehumanization, however pious, made your personal experience profoundly sucky. The social standing of the Pythia was paradoxical. On one hand, you commanded immense respect and reverence from all over the Greek world. Rulers consulted you. Armies awaited your words. and philosophers pondered your utterances. You were a figure of unparalleled spiritual authority. On the other hand, your personal identity was virtually erased. You were the Oracle, Apollo's mouthpiece, not an individual woman with her own name or desires. This elevation to divine status came at the cost of your human identity, leaving you revered yet personally invisible. So, your life as the Oracle of Delphi was defined by a profound and relentless commitment to purity, austerity, and profound isolation. Stripped of personal freedom, relationships, and worldly comforts, you lived a life meticulously choreographed by ritual and dedicated solely to serving Apollo. This strict, solitary existence, for all its spiritual grandeur, was a defining, profoundly sucky reality, ensuring that your divine calling was also a personal imprisonment. Having committed to a life of rigorous purity and profound isolation, you, the Pythia, now face the central, terrifying act of your sacred duty, entering the prophetic trance within the Adyton, the most sacred chamber of the Temple of Apollo. Forget serene meditation or gentle contemplation. This was a disturbing, often violent process, shrouded in mystery and filled with a chilling ambiguity that made your divine role profoundly sucky. Imagine the prelude. You would undergo meticulous ritual purification. You might wash in the sacred Castalian spring, drink from the holy Cassium water, and chew laurel leaves, all believed to prepare your body and mind for divine possession. This wasn't a quick cleansing. It was a deeply symbolic and physical preparation, designed to make you an unblemished conduit for Apollo. The air would be thick with the scent of burning laurel and other aromatic herbs, creating an almost intoxicating atmosphere that blurred the line between the physical and the spiritual. It truly sucked to have your spiritual preparation feel like a drug trip. Then, you would descend into the Adyton, the inner sanctuary of the temple, a chamber forbidden to all but the Pythia herself and a few high-ranking priests, prophetii. This was a small, often dim space, designed to concentrate the sacred energy of the site. Ancient accounts, particularly those from classical writers like Plutarch, who served as a priest at Delphi himself centuries later, describe the Pythia sitting on a tripod, a three-legged stool over a chasm or fissure in the earth. From this fissure, it was believed, fumes or vapors pneuma rose from the earth, acting as the medium through which Apollo's divine inspiration would enter you. The nature of these fumes has been a subject of intense historical and scientific debate. For centuries, scholars dismissed the idea, assuming any fumes were mythical or caused by a hallucinating Pythia. However, modern geological research at Delphi has revealed that the temple sits on a geological fault line, and that intoxicating gases, such as ethylene, could indeed have risen from fissures in ancient times. Ethylene is a sweet-smelling gas that can induce a euphoric, dissociative trance, leading to disorientation, confusion, and a sensation of spiritual communion, without necessarily causing immediate unconsciousness. Imagine inhaling this invisible vapor, feeling your mind begin to detach from your body, your thoughts becoming fragmented and your senses distorted. This wasn't a pleasant meditative state. It was a forced alteration of consciousness, a terrifying descent into a drug-induced trance for divine purposes. It really sucked to literally inhale your job. As the pneuma took hold, your body would begin to react. Accounts described the Pythia going into a frenzy, convulsing, foaming at the mouth, her voice becoming hoarse or inhuman, speaking in incomprehensible utterances. This was the moment of divine possession, where Apollo was believed to speak directly through you. The priests, standing nearby, would interpret your wild cries and disjointed words, translating them into the cryptic prophecies that petitioners would receive. Imagine your own body twisting and contorting, your voice no longer your own, as your spirit wrestled with the immense power of a god. This physical and mental violence, this profound loss of self-control, would be utterly terrifying. The terrifying loss of control was central to the process. You were a vessel, not a conscious participant. Your mind was overridden, your body merely an instrument for divine communication. This profound intrusion, this repeated subjugation of your will by a god, would take an immense psychological toll. Each prophetic session would be an exhausting ordeal, leaving you drained, disoriented, and perhaps deeply traumatized, carrying the echoes of Apollo's voice and the lingering disorientation of the trance. One common misconception is that the Pythia simply sat calmly and delivered clear prophecies, while later literary accounts sometimes portrayed this serene image. Historical sources like Plutarch suggest the reality was far more chaotic and physically demanding, especially when the pneuma was strong or the Pythia was old or infirm. The Pythia state was often one of violent ecstasy or convulsion, requiring the priest to physically restrain her on the tripod to prevent her from harming herself. This indicates a far more brutal and physically taxing experience than popular imagination suggests. Historians still meticulously study ancient geological reports, archaeological findings, and the various classical accounts like those of Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Plutarch to understand the precise mechanisms and physical manifestations of the Pythia's trance, and whether a single explanation like ethylene gas fully accounts for all historical descriptions. Furthermore, the very physical environment of the Adyton added to the horror. It was a dark, confined space, often smoky from incense, intensifying the claustrophobia and disorientation, the constant anticipation of the fumes, the knowledge of what awaited you, would build into an almost unbearable tension before each session. You were literally going into a dark, gassy hole to become possessed, a ritual that blurred the lines between the sacred and the terrifying. The fact that the Pythia's health would often decline with age, and some accounts suggest their lifespans might have been shortened, further indicates the physical toll of these repeated trance states, the constant physiological stress, perhaps from inhaling gases or the sheer exertion of the convulsions, would slowly erode your body, making your divine service a slow, self-sacrificing demise. So, your ultimate duty as the Oracle of Delphi involved a profound and terrifying immersion into the sacred, yet disturbing, act of prophecy. The very chamber became an instrument of your torment, and the process of entering your prophetic trance was a physically violent, mentally disorienting, and profoundly sucky ordeal, where your body was consumed by divine inspiration, leaving you a mere conduit, forever marked by the terror of divine possession, even as your body convulsed and your mind reeled from the terrifying trance within the Adyton. Your sacred duty as the Pythia was far from over. You then faced the immense, often agonizing, challenge of delivering cryptic prophecies, words so ambiguous and open to interpretation that they shaped the fate of nations while simultaneously burdening you with an unbearable weight of responsibility and potential blame. This made your divine gift profoundly sucky. Imagine emerging from the Adyton, your body still trembling, Your mind disoriented by the powerful fumes and divine possession? You are perhaps supported by the priests prophetai, who have witnessed your frenzied utterances. Your voice might still be hoarse or raw, and your words would often be disjointed, seemingly nonsensical, or delivered in a heightened, almost inhuman tone. Your task was then to articulate these divine whispers, knowing that powerful rulers and desperate individuals hung on your every word. It truly sucked to be a cosmic fortune cookie. The prophecies delivered by the Pythia were famously ambiguous and open to multiple interpretations. Apollo, it seemed, rarely spoke in plain language instead. His divine messages were shrouded in riddles, metaphors, and often vague predictions that could mean one thing to one petitioner and something entirely different to another. For example, when King Croesus of Lydia consulted the oracle about going to war against the Persians, the oracle famously replied, "If you cross the Halys River, a great empire will be destroyed." Croesus, overjoyed, took this as a sign of victory, only to discover, upon his devastating defeat, that the great empire destroyed was his own. This chilling ambiguity was a hallmark of Delphic prophecy. The immense pressure of delivering these cryptic messages was immense. You knew that your words could determine the course of a war, the founding of a colony, or the fate of a king. A single misinterpreted phrase, a subtle nuance missed by the priests translating your words, could lead to catastrophic consequences. And while the ambiguity allowed the oracle to maintain its reputation by claiming petitioners had simply misinterpreted Apollo's subtle truth, it placed a heavy burden of potential blame on you, the vessel. If a prophecy led to disaster, despite official explanations, the shadow of failure would still cling to your sacred office. It really sucked to be God's scapegoat. The process of translation and interpretation by the priests, prophetai, was crucial, and also a source of potential manipulation or distortion. The priests would listen intently to your frenzied utterances, then carefully craft them into hexameter verse, the poetic form of epic poetry, like Homer's Iliad, making them sound authoritative and divine. Their own biases, political allegiances, or even simple misunderstandings could subtly influence the final wording of the prophecy, potentially shaping its meaning to suit their own agendas or the interests of powerful petitioners. You were merely the mouth, they were the interpreters. Holding immense power over the final message, petitioners would often come with highly specific questions, seeking clear yes or no answers, but Apollo rarely provided such clarity. Instead, he offered riddles, forcing the petitioners and the priests to intensely ponder the deeper meaning, to consider all possible outcomes, and ultimately, to make their own difficult decisions based on an ambiguous divine hint. This ambiguity allowed Apollo's reputation to remain intact, as any unfavorable outcome could always be blamed on human misinterpretation rather than the god's fallibility. One common misconception is that all Delphic prophecies were spontaneous, inspired utterances, while the Pythia's trance was believed to be genuine. There's evidence that the priests often played a significant role in gathering information about petitioners' circumstances and questions beforehand. This allowed them to craft prophecies that were ambiguous enough to always be right in retrospect, regardless of the outcome, or to subtly guide petitioners towards outcomes that aligned with Delphic interests or prevailing political realities. This blend of genuine trance and astute information gathering added to the oracle's mystique and long-lasting influence. Historians still meticulously study the surviving examples of Delphic prophecies and the historical outcomes. analyzing the extent to which they were truly prescient versus cleverly ambiguous or politically influenced. Furthermore, the sheer volume of petitioners and the gravity of their questions would place an immense psychological burden on you. Kings sought guidance for wars, cities for colonization, and individuals for personal dilemmas. Each question carried the weight of countless lives and untold fortunes. This constant exposure to the anxieties and desperate hopes of humanity, channeled through your own body and mind, would be emotionally exhausting, leaving you drained and perhaps even cynical about the human condition. The ethical dilemma of delivering prophecies that could lead to disaster, even if unintended, would also weigh heavily on your conscience. Imagine knowing your words might contribute to a city's destruction or a king's downfall. Even if Apollo's message was deliberately vague, this profound responsibility, coupled with the lack of true personal agency, would be a constant source of mental anguish, making your divine gift a crushing burden. So, your ultimate duty as the Oracle of Delphi involved delivering cryptic prophecies, words so ambiguous and open to interpretation that they shaped the fate of nations while burdening you with immense responsibility. This profound weight of divine communication, coupled with the political manipulation and the psychological toll of ambiguity, made your sacred role a profoundly sucky and often terrifying experience, forever defined by the words that flowed through you but were not truly your own. Even as you delivered cryptic prophecies and battled the lingering disorientation of the trance, your existence as the Pythia was perpetually ensnared in the ruthless world of political intrigue. Forget genuine spiritual guidance. Your sacred prophecies were constantly manipulated by powerful city-states, ambitious generals, and cunning politicians, turning you into a tool of immense influence but utterly devoid of true control, making your divine gift profoundly sucky. Imagine the petitioners who thronged Delphi, seeking Apollo's wisdom. They weren't just humble individuals, they were often the most powerful figures in the Greek world, kings like Leonidas of Sparta, mighty city-states like Athens and Corinth, and ambitious tyrants. These entities came not for simple advice, but for a divine sanction that would legitimize their wars, justify their colonization efforts, or condemn their rivals. Your words, once spoken in a seemingly pure trance, became invaluable weapons in their political arsenals. It truly sucked to be a geopolitical puppet. The priests of Apollo Prophetai played a crucial, often ambiguous, role in this manipulation. As the interpreters of your frenzied utterances, they held immense power. They would listen to your disjointed words and then craft them into the poetic, ambiguous hexameter verse that became the official prophecy. Their own political sympathies, their allegiance to specific city-states as the Delphic Amphictyony. The council that governed Delphi was composed of representatives from various Greek states, or even direct bribes could subtly influence the final wording of the prophecy, swaying it to favor one faction over another. You were the mouthpiece, but they were the editors, with immense power over the final message. Think of the immense pressure on these priests, and by extension, on you. If a powerful city-state like Athens, for example, sought a prophecy to justify a war against Sparta, the priests might feel compelled to deliver a message that, even if ambiguous, leaned towards Athens' favor, to maintain good relations and secure future donations to the sanctuary. This meant that the god's word, channeled through you, became a tool in the intricate, often brutal, game of Greek politics, the ambiguity of the prophecies itself, while appearing to protect Apollo's reputation, as any unfavorable outcome could be blamed on human misinterpretation. also served the political agendas of the priests and petitioners. A vague prophecy could be interpreted in multiple ways, allowing a general to claim divine sanction regardless of victory or defeat. This strategic ambiguity allowed the oracle to maintain its influence, even when its advice led to disaster for those who misinterpreted it. It really sucked to be vague for political gain. Your power as the Pythia was immense. Yes, but it was power without true control. You were the vessel, the channel, but never the wielder. You could not choose who consulted you, what questions were asked, or how your prophecies were ultimately interpreted and used. You were a sacred instrument, revered for your connection to the divine, but entirely subject to the will of others who sought to leverage your spiritual authority for their own worldly gains. This profound lack of autonomy, despite your unique gift, was a constant source of frustration and silent misery. One common misconception is that the Oracle of Delphi was always completely neutral and impartial, while ideally it strove for impartiality. Historical accounts reveal numerous instances where the oracle's prophecies were influenced by political pressures, alliances, or even specific gifts from powerful city-states. The sanctuary, like any major institution, had to navigate complex political currents to survive and maintain its prestige. Historians still meticulously study the political context surrounding major Delphic prophecies, often finding compelling evidence of subtle and sometimes overt political influence on the oracle's pronouncements. Furthermore, the physical isolation and the ritualistic nature of your life meant you had limited information about the outside world's political machinations. You might not fully grasp the complex rivalries between distant city-states or the specific intentions of a particular general. This lack of worldly knowledge would make you even more susceptible to manipulation by the priests and petitioners, who could frame their questions or interpret your answers in ways that suited their pre-existing agendas. You were a divine channel, but an earthly pawn. The ethical dilemma of being used for political ends would weigh heavily on your conscience. Imagine knowing your words, delivered in a trance, might lead a city to war, resulting in countless deaths, or prompt a ruler to make a disastrous decision. While you might believe you were simply delivering Apollo's word, the terrifying consequences of your prophecies, amplified by political manipulation, would be a constant, silent burden, making your sacred role profoundly sucky. So, your existence as the Oracle of Delphi, despite its immense spiritual authority, was profoundly sucky due to your constant entanglement in political intrigue. Your sacred prophecies were manipulated, your divine gift exploited, and your spiritual role transformed into a tool for worldly power games. This profound lack of control over your own divine pronouncements, coupled with the heavy burden of their consequences, ensured that your life as Apollo's mouthpiece was a gilded cage, revered yet utterly controlled. Even as you delivered ambiguous prophecies and were subtly manipulated by political powers, your immense fame as the Oracle of Delphi came with its own demanding and often soul-crushing costs. Forget serene spiritual leadership. Your immense fame was a double-edged sword, bringing constant demands, public scrutiny, and a profound lack of personal autonomy, making your divine role profoundly sucky. Imagine the constant stream of petitioners, from kings seeking advice on warfare to common individuals inquiring about marriage or business ventures. People from all corners of the Greek world, and even beyond, flocked to Delphi. They brought immense wealth and offerings to Apollo's sanctuary, but they also brought a relentless demand for your time and energy. Your life was no longer your own. It was dictated by the pilgrimage schedule and the insatiable need for divine guidance. You were on call, perpetually, for the entire Greek world. It truly sucked to be world famous, but always working. Your fame meant you were under constant public scrutiny. Every word you uttered, every gesture you made, even outside the Adyton, would be observed, interpreted, and discussed. Your demeanor, your piety, your every action had to perfectly align with the image of Apollo's pure vessel. Any perceived lapse, any sign of personal weakness or human fallibility could undermine the oracle's authority and lead to scandal. This relentless observation, this constant need to perform a role, would be emotionally exhausting, leaving you with no true private moments or opportunities for genuine self-expression. Imagine never being able to truly relax, always aware that countless eyes were upon you, judging your every move. The gifts and offerings poured into Delphi were immense, making the sanctuary incredibly wealthy. This wealth, however, belonged to Apollo and his priests, not directly to you. While you were undoubtedly cared for and lived a life free from material want, the riches flowed around you, serving the god and the institution. Rather than enhancing your personal comfort or freedom, you were the golden goose, revered for your output, but not the one enjoying the golden eggs. It really sucked to make everyone else rich. Your lack of personal autonomy was a direct consequence of your fame. You could not travel, leave the sanctuary, or choose your own companions. Your life was dictated by the priests, by the demands of petitioners, and by the strictures of Apollo's service. You were revered, yes, but you were also effectively a prisoner of your own celebrity, confined by the very role that made you famous. This paradox of immense spiritual power combined with profound personal powerlessness was a constant source of misery. The ambiguity of your prophecies, while tactically clever for the priests, also added to the burden of your fame. When a prophecy led to a successful outcome, Apollo received the glory. When it led to disaster due to misinterpretation, of course, the burden of clarification or even subtle blame could fall back on the Pythia. You were celebrated for wisdom that was often incomprehensible, adding a layer of ironic detachment to your public persona. It really sucked to be famous for being vague. One common misconception is that the Pythia was a single, continuous individual throughout centuries. In reality, multiple Pythias served concurrently or consecutively, though only one delivered prophecies at a time. The office was continuous, but the individual women rotated, often serving until death. This meant that while the Oracle of Delphi was a timeless institution, the individual women holding the title were constantly changing, adding a layer of personal anonymity to the fame of the office itself. Historians still meticulously study the various textual accounts of different Pythias, noting subtle differences in their personal influence or interpretive styles, revealing that while the office was static, the women who filled it were unique, individual beings burdened by their sacred role. Furthermore, the very physical toll of entering the trance, as discussed in Chapter 3, combined with the relentless demands of constant prophecy, would mean that your periods of true peace or rest were rare. Your body and mind were constantly being prepared, used, and recuperated, ensuring that the demands of your fame literally consumed your physical and mental resources. Your celebrity was exhausting. The psychological burden of being a divine conduit was immense. You were constantly aware that you were merely a vessel for a god, your own identity subsumed by his will. This spiritual possession, however sacred, was an inherent violation of your personal autonomy, leaving you with a profound sense of otherness and perhaps even a lingering detachment from your own humanity. You were revered, but rarely truly understood or truly seen as an individual. So, your life as the Oracle of Delphi, for all its unparalleled spiritual authority, was profoundly sucky due to the relentless pressures of your fickle fame. You were constantly under public scrutiny, endlessly demanded by petitioners, and ultimately a prisoner of your own celebrity, with no true personal freedom or genuine autonomy. This paradoxical existence, where immense renown came at the cost of your very self, was a defining and deeply miserable aspect of your divine calling. Even as you, the Pythia, grappled with the crushing burden of fame and the constant manipulation by priests and politicians, your body itself bore the brunt of your sacred calling. The relentless cycle of entering the prophetic trance, often induced by intoxicating gases, took a devastating physical toll, eroding your body and mind over time and making your divine role profoundly sucky. Imagine the physiological reality of repeatedly entering a trance state through the inhalation of ethylene gas. As modern geological theories suggest, while the gas might induce euphoria and dissociation, it is still a chemical affecting your nervous system. The process was often described as one of violent ecstasy or convulsion. Your body would tense, perhaps shake uncontrollably, and your vocal cords would strain from uttering the disjointed cries and prophecies. This wasn't a peaceful, meditative state. It was a physically violent and exhausting ordeal that your body was forced to undergo repeatedly, sometimes multiple times a day during busy periods. It truly sucked to be physically broken by a god. The immediate aftermath of a trance session would be one of profound exhaustion and disorientation. Your muscles would ache from the convulsions, your head would throb, and your mind would struggle to reorient itself to normal reality. You might experience nausea, dizziness, and a lingering sense of detachment. The energy expenditure of such a profound physiological event would be immense, leaving you drained and debilitated. There was no comfortable recovery room. You would simply be led back to your chambers to recuperate, often quickly, before the next wave of petitioners arrived. Over time, this repeated physical and mental strain would lead to chronic health problems. The constant inhalation of gases, even if non-lethal, could have long-term effects on your respiratory system. The extreme physiological stress of the trance state, repeated over years or decades, could impact your cardiovascular system, leading to chronic fatigue, heart strain, or other age-related ailments. Your nervous system would be perpetually taxed, potentially contributing to tremors, cognitive impairment, or psychological instability in your later years. It really sucked to have your job literally age you. The Pythia's vocal cords would also suffer immensely, delivering prophecies in a hoarse, strained voice, often for extended periods, and perhaps enduring fits of foaming at the mouth, as some accounts suggest, would take a severe toll on your throat. Chronic laryngitis, vocal nodules, or permanent damage to your voice would be a likely occupational hazard, making your very instrument of prophecy a source of constant pain and discomfort. Imagine your voice, once clear, becoming permanently raw and broken, a testament to your divine service. Furthermore, the general lack of modern medical care exacerbated these issues. There were no neurologists, no specialized lung doctors, no physical therapists to alleviate the cumulative damage. Any health problem arising from your sacred duties would be treated with rudimentary remedies, or simply endured, ensuring that your body slowly deteriorated under the relentless demands of Apollo's service. Your divine role offered no immunity from earthly ailments. One common misconception is that the Pythia's trance was always entirely a spiritual phenomenon. While ancient Greeks certainly believed in divine possession, modern geological studies at Delphi in the late 20th century provided compelling evidence that the temple sits on a geological fault line, and that intoxicating gases, including ethylene, could have risen from fissures in the Addadin. Ethylene is known to induce a euphoric, dissociative state, leading to disorientation, confusion, and a sensation of spiritual communion consistent with the Pythia's described behavior. While this theory doesn't negate the spiritual belief, it offers a scientific explanation for the physical means of the trance. Historians and geologists still meticulously study the precise geological features of Delphi and the chemical properties of ancient gases to fully understand the mechanisms behind the Pythia's prophetic state. The psychological toll of this physical erosion would be immense. You would witness your own body slowly failing, breaking down under the weight of a divine burden. The memory of your vibrant physical self would contrast starkly with your current state of chronic pain and fatigue. This awareness of physical decline, coupled with the continued demands of your role, would be a constant source of mental anguish, adding to the profound sense of misery that permeated your existence. The vulnerability of the Pythia, physically exhausted and mentally drained after a trance, also created a potential for exploitation. While the priests generally protected the Pythia, her weakened state after a session could theoretically make her susceptible to manipulation or even harm if nefarious individuals gained access to her. This inherent physical fragility, despite her spiritual power, added another layer of quiet danger to her sacred office. So, your life as the Oracle of Delphi was profoundly sucky due to the relentless physical toll of repeatedly entering the prophetic trance. Your body was systematically eroded by the intense physiological stress, the inhalation of gases, and the sheer physical exertion of divine possession. This constant debilitating process of physical decay was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of your divine calling, ensuring that your sacred service was paid for not just with your autonomy, but with your very health and vitality, even as your body suffered the relentless physical toll of prophecy and your mind grappled with the complexities of ambiguous divine messages. Your life as the Oracle of Delphi was consumed by another pervasive misery, constant demands from an endless stream of petitioners. Forget peace and quiet reflection. Your sacred duty meant you had little personal time, your existence perpetually dictated by the insatiable needs of the ancient world, making your divine role profoundly sucky. Imagine your daily life in the sanctuary from early morning. The sacred precinct would begin to fill with people. They came from all corners of the Greek world and beyond, envoys from mighty city-states, ambitious generals, desperate individuals, wealthy merchants, and humble peasants. They brought questions, offerings, and an unyielding expectation for divine guidance. Your time was no longer your own. It belonged entirely to Apollo and his human supplicants. It truly sucked to be perpetually on call for divine intervention. The stream of petitioners was relentless. There were specific days for consultations, often only once a month, on the seventh day after the new moon, during the warmer months, although special sessions could be arranged. But even on non-oracular days, your life would be a constant preparation for these sessions. You would undergo purification rites, meditations, and consult with the priests, ensuring you were perpetually ready to receive Apollo's word. There was little concept of downtime or personal leisure. Your existence was a continuous state of spiritual readiness and public service. The gravity of the petitioner's questions would add immense psychological weight. Kings sought advice on declaring war, generals inquired about military campaigns, and city-states asked about founding new colonies. These were not trivial matters, your words, interpreted by the priests, could lead to the rise or fall of empires, the prosperity or destruction of cities, and the lives of countless individuals. Imagine the immense burden of knowing your utterances, however cryptic, held such profound consequences, a constant pressure that never truly subsided. It really sucked to hold the fate of nations in your vague words. Even humble petitioners added to the burden. A farmer might ask about his harvest, a young man about his marriage, or a desperate individual about a lost item, while perhaps less impactful on a grand scale. Their personal anxieties and fervent hopes would still weigh on you. You were the repository of all their fears and aspirations, a silent witness to the endless parade of human desperation. The very process of receiving petitioners was itself demanding. While you didn't interact directly with the general populace, the priest would convey their questions to you in the adyton. You would then enter your trance, deliver the prophecy, and then exit, often exhausted and disoriented, only to face the next question or prepare for the next session. This continuous mental and physical exertion, coupled with the lack of true rest, would contribute to profound fatigue and stress. One common misconception is that the Pythia only delivered prophecies on a few specific days of the year. While the main oracular day was monthly, the Pythion and the oracle might be closed during winter months as Apollo supposedly left Delphi for Hyperborea. The preparation for these sessions and the constant presence of pilgrims and their demands meant that the Pythia's life was far from leisurely. Even outside of direct prophecy, her spiritual and public duties were relentless. Historians still meticulously study ancient calendars and pilgrimage accounts to understand the precise operational schedule of the Delphic oracle and the daily demands placed upon the Pythia and her priestly retinue. Furthermore, the priest's role as intermediaries also contributed to your lack of personal time. They managed the flow of petitioners, collected offerings, and ensured the smooth running of the sanctuary. While this shielded you from direct interaction, it meant that your daily schedule was dictated by their management, ensuring you were always available for the next ritual or prophecy. You were a divine instrument, efficiently managed to meet the demands of the masses. The economic importance of the Oracle to Delphi also contributed to these constant demands. The immense wealth of the sanctuary, built on offerings from grateful petitioners and powerful city-states, relied on the oracle's consistent availability and perceived efficacy. This economic imperative would subtly push the priests to maximize the number of oracular sessions. Further intensifying the demands on the Pythia, you were a spiritual resource, and an economic one, expected to continuously produce. The lack of any true escape from your divine duty was perhaps the most defining aspect of this constant demand. You were chosen for life, bound to Apollo's service until your death or complete infirmity. There was no retirement, no vacation, no moments of true, unburdened peace. Your entire existence was a perpetual response to the needs of others, mediated by your unique spiritual gift. This constant, unyielding demand for your divine service was a defining, soul-crushing burden. So, your life as the Oracle of Delphi was consumed by the relentless, constant demands from an endless stream of petitioners. Your personal time, your rest, and your very peace of mind were sacrificed to the insatiable need for divine guidance from across the Greek world. This perpetual service, coupled with the immense psychological weight of your prophecies, made your divine calling a profoundly sucky and utterly exhausting experience, ensuring that your life as Apollo's mouthpiece was one of continuous, unyielding servitude. Even as your body suffered the relentless physical toll of prophecy and your spirit withered under constant demands, your sacred office, the Oracle of Delphi, faced a different, more insidious threat, discreditation, and decline. Forget eternal reverence, the waning faith in prophecy, political shifts, and external pressures slowly eroded the oracle's influence, leading to your spiritual and institutional decline, making the later years of your divine role profoundly sucky. Imagine the subtle, chilling shift in atmosphere. For centuries, the Oracle of Delphi was the undisputed spiritual and political authority in the Greek world, its prophecies shaping empires and guiding generals. But as the classical period gave way to later eras, particularly with the rise of rational philosophy, the increasing skepticism from some intellectuals, and the changing political landscape, the oracle's power began to wane. You would feel this erosion of faith, a slow, agonizing slide from absolute reverence to cautious skepticism, or even outright disregard. It truly sucked to watch your divine purpose slowly become irrelevant. One major factor in this decline was the rise of philosophy and human reason. Thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle encouraged logical inquiry, critical thinking, and a reliance on human intellect to solve problems, rather than blind faith in divine pronouncements. While philosophy didn't immediately dismantle religious belief, it subtly chipped away at the absolute authority of oracles. People began to question more, to seek rational explanations rather than simply accepting ambiguous divine words. Your prophecies, once unassailable, now faced intellectual scrutiny and public debate. The changing political landscape also played a crucial role. The rise of powerful empires like Macedon under Philip II and Alexander the Great, and later the Roman Republic, gradually diminished the independent city-states that had once been the oracle's primary clients. These new powers often relied on their own political and military might, rather than divine guidance, to achieve their goals. When they did consult the oracle, it was often for symbolic legitimacy rather than genuine strategic advice, reducing your role to a mere formality. Imagine kings no longer seeking your true guidance, but simply wanting a prop for their political theater. It really sucked to be a glorified prop. Furthermore, the ambiguity of your prophecies, once a strength that allowed for interpretations to fit any outcome, slowly became a weakness. As skepticism grew, people became more frustrated with answers that offered no clear direction. A prophecy that could mean anything eventually meant nothing. This ambiguity, once seen as divine subtlety, came to be viewed as deliberate vagueness or even trickery, further eroding trust in the oracle's efficacy. Political manipulation continued, and perhaps even intensified, contributing to the oracle's discreditation. Powerful figures might bribe priests or exert pressure to obtain prophecies that suited their agenda, regardless of divine truth. When such politically convenient prophecies failed spectacularly in the real world, it would damage the oracle's reputation. Your sacred utterances became tainted by human corruption, undermining their spiritual authority in the eyes of many. One common misconception is that the Oracle of Delphi maintained its absolute power and influence consistently throughout its entire history, while its peak was during the classical Greek period. Its influence gradually declined over centuries, though it continued to operate for a very long time, into the Roman era and even beyond. Albeit with diminished prestige, the Roman emperors, for example, occasionally consulted the oracle, but often treated it more as a historical curiosity or a source of symbolic legitimacy than a direct conduit for divine will. Historians still meticulously study the changing patterns of pilgrimage, offerings, and political consultations at Delphi across different historical periods to chart the precise trajectory of the oracle's influence and its eventual decline, revealing a long, complex history of adaptation and eventual marginalization. The physical decline of Delphi itself also mirrored the oracle's waning power. Earthquakes, wars, and the gradual shifting of the geological fault line, potentially affecting the natural gas emissions, could have physically impacted the sanctuary, making it less accessible or less suitable for prophecy. The physical environment, once believed to be the source of divine inspiration, might have become less reliable over time, further contributing to the decline in belief, the rise of new religions and philosophical schools, particularly the eventual spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. Dealt a final, decisive blow. Christian emperors actively suppressed pagan cults and divination practices, seeing them as demonic or heretical. By the 4th century CE, the Oracle of Delphi was in its final decline, eventually ceasing to operate altogether as Christianity became the dominant religion. Your ancient sacred role, once central to Greek life, was systematically dismantled by a new spiritual order, leaving you and your temple obsolete. So, your later years as the Oracle of Delphi were characterized by a profound and sucky process of discreditation and decline. You would witness the slow erosion of faith in prophecy, the shifting tides of political power, and the eventual triumph of new ideologies that rendered your sacred role irrelevant. This ultimate marginalization, after centuries of unparalleled spiritual authority, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your divine calling, ensuring that even Apollo's voice could not halt the relentless march of history. You've battled through the terrifying selection process, endured a life of forced purity and isolation, suffered the violent onset of prophetic trances, grappled with the burden of cryptic pronouncements, been manipulated by political powers, and finally witnessed the slow, agonizing decline of the oracle's fame and influence, as the echoes of Apollo's voice fade into the silent mountain air and the phantom scent of laurel leaves dissipates. A profound, lingering truth settles upon you being the Oracle of Delphi. For all its immense spiritual authority, was a life lived in a holy prison, a profound paradox of unparalleled wisdom and crushing loneliness, ultimately making it profoundly sucky. Consider the unimaginable personal sacrifice that defined your existence. Your life was not your own. It was seized by divine decree, stripping you of autonomy, family, and personal relationships. You lived in perpetual celibacy, cut off from the warmth of human intimacy and the joy of raising children. Your very identity as an individual woman was subsumed by your role as Apollo's mouthpiece, leaving you revered yet personally invisible, a mere vessel for a god's will. It truly sucked to be eternally revered, but never truly known. Then there's the physical and psychological toll of your sacred duties, the ritualistic purification, the terrifying descent into the Adaton, and the physically violent onset of the trance, possibly induced by intoxicating gases, took a relentless toll on your body and mind. Chronic exhaustion, disorientation, vocal strain, and potential long-term health issues were the grim companions of your divine inspiration. The immense pressure of delivering prophecies that shaped the fate of nations, combined with the psychological burden of their ambiguity, created a pervasive mental anguish that offered no respite. And what about the constant demands and pervasive manipulation? You were perpetually on call, your life dictated by the endless stream of petitioners seeking guidance, your prophecies, however sacred, were routinely twisted and exploited by cunning priests and ruthless politicians, turning you into a tool for their worldly gains. You wielded immense power, but had no true control over its application, making you a pawn in a larger game that often led to tragic outcomes for those who misinterpreted your words. This constant manipulation, this knowledge that your divine gift was being used for earthly advantage, was a profound source of misery. Finally, the ultimate irony of your decline. After centuries of unparalleled spiritual authority, the oracle's influence slowly waned. The rise of rational philosophy, the shift in political power to new empires, and the eventual triumph of Christianity gradually rendered your sacred role irrelevant. You witnessed the erosion of faith, the diminishing flow of pilgrims, and the eventual silence of Apollo, leaving you, the vessel of a once mighty god, to exist in a state of historical anachronism, a profound testament to the impermanence of even divine power. It really sucked to see your life's purpose fade into irrelevance, one particularly poignant and often overlooked. Detail is the inherent contradiction between the Pythia's spiritual authority and her lack of worldly power. While kings and generals bowed before her, she herself lived an austere life, subject to the authority of the male priests who managed the sanctuary and interpreted her words. She held immense spiritual power, capable of influencing empires, but no temporal power. She could not command armies, levy taxes, or make laws. This stark distinction highlights the specific nature of her unique role, a channel, not a ruler, ensuring her personal confinement even amidst global influence. Historians still meticulously study the precise power dynamics within the Delphic sanctuary, debating the extent of the Pythia's personal influence versus the institutional power of the priests, often finding a complex interplay rather than simple subservience. Ultimately, the story of being the Oracle of Delphi is a profound paradox. It reveals a life of immense spiritual importance, where a woman became the voice of a god, guiding the destiny of an entire civilization. Yet, this divine calling came at an unbearable personal cost, a life of forced isolation, physical and psychological torment, relentless demands, and profound lack of autonomy. Your existence was a holy prison, a gilded cage of reverence and exploitation, ensuring that your life, for all its unparalleled wisdom, was profoundly, undeniably sucky. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant whispers of ancient prophecies and the imagined presence of Apollo's divine fumes fade into the quiet background of history. You are safe, in your own time, far removed from the chilling demands of divine service and the relentless weight of an ancient oracle. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of your own autonomy and the profound freedom to choose your own path and purpose. A stark contrast to the sucky truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.